On a quiet winter night in America, long before most voters are paying attention, the warning signs are already flashing. They're not loud. They don't arrive as breaking news banners or dramatic speeches on the steps of the Capitol. Instead, they show up in small, almost forgettable places. In low-turnout primaries, in crowded town halls, in polling shifts that seem minor until they aren't. The 2026 United States midterm elections were never supposed to feel this uncertain. Historically, midterms follow a pattern. The party in the White House braces for losses. The opposition senses opportunity. Voters recalibrate power. Washington adjusts. It's a rhythm Americans have seen before. After the wave elections of 1994, the backlash of 2006, the Tea Party surge of 2010, the realignment hints of 2018, and the razor-thin margins of 2022. But 2026 doesn't feel routine. It feels unsettled. At first glance, the political map appears familiar. Control of the House and Senate hangs in the balance. Key battleground states, places like Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin, once again sit at the center of the national conversation. Fundraising totals are breaking records. Campaign ads are saturating digital platforms months earlier than expected. But beneath the surface, something more complicated is unfolding. Primary challenges are emerging not just between parties, but within them. Candidates are no longer simply running against the other side. They're running against their own party's identity. On one side, Republicans are wrestling with the direction of a movement that has reshaped the party over the past decade. Some candidates promise continuity, doubling down on populist themes, cultural flashpoints, and a combative posture toward federal institutions. Others speak the language of pragmatism, economic focus, and electability in swing districts. On the other side, Democrats are facing a different tension. A coalition built on suburban moderates, urban progressives, labor unions, and younger voters is showing signs of strain. Policy disagreements that once simmered quietly are becoming primary season flashpoints. And the electorate itself, it is shifting in ways that defy simple analysis. Younger voters are participating earlier in primary cycles. Independent voters are registering strategically to influence party nominations. Rural counties that once voted predictably are producing unexpected margins. Urban districts are seeing turnout volatility that strategists struggle to model. Pollsters are cautious. Campaign managers are anxious. Party leadership is unusually quiet. The midterms are still months away, yet early primary contests in select districts are already being treated as national referendums. A state legislative upset in one region sparks cable news debates about a trend. A narrow congressional primary victory somewhere else triggers speculation about ideological momentum. Every small result feels amplified. This is the first warning sign, the sense that the margins are thinner than they appear. In previous cycles, analysts could rely on broad assumptions. Economic growth tends to help incumbents. Inflation hurts them. Presidential approval ratings correlate with midterm outcomes. Turnout models can predict likely voter behavior with reasonable confidence. In 2026, those models are wobbling. Voters are increasingly ticket-splitting, supporting one party at the state level and another at the federal level. Issue salience is fragmented. For some voters, border security dominates. For others, healthcare costs. For others still, democracy itself becomes the defining theme. There is no single narrative driving the electorate. And when there is no single narrative, volatility grows. Another warning sign appears in fundraising data. Small dollar donations are surging in primary contests that traditionally would not draw national attention. Grassroots donors are responding emotionally to primary challenges, not just general election battles. That suggests intensity. but it also suggests internal competition. Intensity is powerful, but it can be destabilizing. Meanwhile, outside spending groups are positioning themselves earlier than usual. Political action committees aligned with ideological wings of both parties are investing heavily in primary messaging. They're not waiting for November. They're shaping the battlefield now. Because whoever wins the primaries in 2026 may determine not just who controls Congress, but what each party becomes. There's another subtle shift. Voter trust in institutions, from Congress to the courts to the media, remains historically low. When trust declines, unpredictability rises. Late-breaking events have greater impact. Narratives can change quickly. Momentum can build overnight. Campaign veterans privately admit they are preparing for surprises, and surprises in midterm elections can become turning points. In districts once considered safe, credible challengers are emerging. In states thought to be solidly aligned with one party, internal fractures are drawing headlines. Political consultants describe a cycle where incumbency is no longer the shield it once was. The assumption of safety is eroding, and perhaps most telling of all, voter enthusiasm does not align neatly with party leadership messaging. In some primaries, grassroots energy is pulling candidates toward sharper rhetoric. In others, fatigue is driving calls for moderation. Two impulses. Competing futures. All unfolding under the umbrella of a single election year. The 2026 midterms are not just a contest between Democrats and Republicans. They are a contest over definitions. What each party stands for, who it represents, and how it plans to govern in a deeply divided country. But at this early stage, clarity is elusive. Poll numbers fluctuate week to week. Endorsements carry less predictable weight. Social media amplifies fringe narratives and mainstream messages alike. Cable news panels argue over momentum, but few are willing to make confident predictions. And that uncertainty, that sense that something is shifting but not yet visible, is the defining mood of this cycle. History shows that midterms can serve as correction mechanisms. They can check presidential power. They can usher in new leadership. They can even signal long-term political realignments. But sometimes they reveal fractures that were building quietly for years. As early primaries approach and candidates begin to define themselves more sharply, the question grows more urgent. Is 2026 simply another midterm adjustment, or is it the beginning of a deeper transformation in American politics? The warning signs are there. The tension is building, and this time, both parties seem to understand that the real battle may not be November, but what happens before it. By the time the first major primaries of 2026 begin drawing national attention, one thing is clear. This is not simply a fight between red and blue, it is a fight within red and within blue. For Republicans, the question hovering over nearly every competitive primary is deceptively simple. What comes next? Over the past decade, the party has undergone a dramatic transformation. The rise of populist energy, skepticism toward federal institutions, and a redefinition of conservative identity reshaped its voter base and leadership structure. Candidates aligned with that movement argue that the path forward is strength through confrontation, sharper messaging, cultural clarity, and unwavering loyalty to the themes that animated millions of voters in previous cycles. But a countercurrent has emerged. In suburban districts that swung unpredictably in recent elections, a different type of Republican candidate is gaining traction, one who emphasizes economic policy, national security, and governing pragmatism. These candidates speak less about grievance and more about stability. They focus on inflation, small, business growth, and restoring predictability to Washington. The tension between these factions is not abstract. It's visible in crowded primary ballots. In states like Texas and Florida, contests once considered safe are drawing high profile. Challengers from the right, accusing incumbents of insufficient ideological commitment. Meanwhile, in battleground regions such as Michigan and North Carolina, party strategists quietly worry that nominees perceived as too extreme could struggle in a general election. The debate isn't just about policy, it's about electability versus authenticity. And primary voters are being asked to decide which matters more. Across town halls and campaign rallies, a subtle but important shift is unfolding. Republican voters are no longer unified around a single national figure or message. Instead, they are testing alternatives. Governors with executive experience are gaining attention. Younger candidates are positioning themselves as the next generation, piece of leadership. Longtime incumbents are defending their records against insurgent challengers who argue that experience has turned into complacency. The result is a party in motion, energetic, but unsettled. Democrats, meanwhile, face their own internal reckoning. The coalition that has powered Democratic victories in recent years is broad, spanning progressive activists, moderate suburban professionals, union households, young voters, and diverse urban communities. That breadth has been a strength in general elections. In primaries, it can become a fault line. Progressive candidates in multiple districts are challenging incumbents they view as too cautious or too closely aligned with establishment leadership. They are campaigning on bold policy platforms: climate investment, healthcare expansion, voting rights protections, and framing 2026 as a moment for urgency. But moderate Democrats warn that sweeping rhetoric may not translate in competitive districts. They argue that voters exhausted by polarization are looking for incremental progress, not ideological escalation. In swing states such as Nevada and Arizona, party strategists are carefully monitoring whether primary messaging could complicate November campaigns. Once again, the same dilemma emerges: energy versus viability, momentum versus math. The Democratic establishment has historically relied on incumbency advantages and institutional endorsements to shape primary outcomes. In 2026, those tools feel less decisive. Grassroots fundraising and digital mobilization allow challengers to build credible campaigns without traditional gatekeepers. Small-dollar donors are not waiting for party signals. They are choosing sides early, and social media ensures that local primaries rarely remain local. A viral debate moment in a single congressional district can spark national attention overnight. A controversial statement can draw millions of views before campaign staff have time to respond. In both parties, generational change is accelerating the friction. Younger candidates, many in their 30s and 40s, are challenging long-serving lawmakers, arguing that the political battles of the past decade require new voices. They campaign fluently in digital spaces, engage directly with voters online, and frame their candidacies as part of a broader renewal. Incumbents counter that institutional knowledge matters, that governing is not performance, and that legislative experience cannot be replaced by viral moments. The divide is philosophical as much as strategic. What is the purpose of political office in 2026? To disrupt? To negotiate? To fight? To govern? Even within safe districts, these questions are driving intense primary battles. Party leadership on both sides faces a delicate balancing act. Publicly, they project unity. Privately, they track polling, data district by district, weighing the risk of ideological purity against the demands of competitive maps. The House, with its narrow margins in recent cycles, is especially vulnerable to internal miscalculations. A handful of districts could determine control. A single primary upset could shift the balance of power. In the Senate, where statewide races magnify every strategic decision, the stakes are even higher. Candidate quality, message discipline, and coalition building are under scrutiny from the moment primaries begin. And yet, perhaps the most revealing element of this internal power struggle is psychological. Primary voters tend to be more engaged, more ideological, and more motivated than general election voters. Their choices shape not only nominees, but the tone of national discourse. In 2026, those voters appear restless. They are not simply choosing representatives, they are choosing direction. Within Republican circles, some see this moment as a continuation of a political revolution that began years ago, unfinished business that demands further transformation. Others see it as an opportunity to recalibrate and broaden appeal. Within Democratic ranks, some argue that bold action is necessary to inspire turnout and address systemic challenges. Others insist that persuasion and coalition maintenance are the only viable path to sustained governance. These debates are not occurring in isolation. They are unfolding against a backdrop of economic uncertainty, shifting demographics, and evolving media ecosystems. Every internal contest carries national implications. Because whoever emerges from these primaries will carry more than a party label. They will carry a version of that party's future. As 2026 progresses, the internal battles grow sharper. Endorsements become symbolic statements about ideology. Fundraising reports are analyzed as signals of momentum. Polling data is dissected not just for who is ahead, but for what that lead represents. Is the base consolidating or fracturing? And beneath the noise of campaign ads and debate stages, one reality becomes impossible to ignore. The 2026 midterms are not just testing the strength of Democrats versus Republicans. They are testing the coherence of both. The power struggle within each party may ultimately shape the power struggle between them. And as the first major primary results begin to come in, the consequences of these internal decisions will start to crystallize. Because when voters choose nominees, they are also choosing the boundaries of political possibility. And in 2026, those boundaries appear more fluid than they have in years. The first major upset doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives with a number, a margin that wasn't supposed to be that close. In a congressional primary that party strategists once described as secure, an incumbent falls, not by a landslide, but by just enough to send a message. Overnight, what was considered stable becomes questionable. Analysts scramble. Headlines use words like shock, warning, and earthquake. But the real story isn't the individual defeat. It's the pattern that begins to emerge. Across multiple states, from suburban districts in Virginia to competitive Senate contests in Ohio and Nevada, primary results reveal something deeper than factional rivalry. They reveal volatility. In district after district, turnout models fail. To predict who shows up, younger voters participate in higher-than-expected numbers in some races, and drop off dramatically in others. Rural turnout surges in one region while flattening in another. Independent voters, where permitted, tip close contests in unpredictable ways. Political certainty, once built on demographic assumptions and historical trends, begins to erode. For decades, campaign strategy relied on identifiable blocks. Suburban, college-educated voters leaned one direction. Non-college, rural voters leaned another. Senior citizens voted at reliable rates. Urban turnout followed consistent patterns. In 2026, those patterns blur. In some Republican primaries, candidates backed by national figures lose to lesser-known challengers who run hyper-local campaigns focused on economic concerns rather than national culture wars. In other races, hardline messaging prevails decisively. signaling that ideological intensity remains powerful in certain regions. Among Democrats, progressive challengers unseat incumbents in a handful of urban districts, while in swing suburbs, moderate candidates fend off insurgent bids with appeals to stability and bipartisan credentials. The takeaway is not uniform, and that's what unsettles strategists the most. There is no clear wave, no singular ideological surge sweeping coast to coast. Instead, there are pockets of movement, localized, emotional, and sometimes contradictory. One of the most revealing shifts is ticket-splitting behavior in early special elections tied to the cycle. Voters who supported one party in a recent presidential contest cross lines in congressional races. In parts of Georgia and Arizona, suburban voters demonstrate a willingness to separate their federal and state-level preferences. It suggests that national branding alone may no longer determine down-ballot outcomes. Campaign messaging adapts quickly. Republican candidates in competitive areas soften language around divisive social issues and sharpen focus on economic anxieties. Democratic candidates in traditionally safe districts adopt more forceful rhetoric to energize their base. But adaptation carries risk. When candidates pivot too quickly, authenticity is questioned. When they remain rigid, they risk alienating swing voters. The balance becomes delicate, and in some cases, impossible. Meanwhile, polling continues to fluctuate dramatically. One week, momentum appears to favor Republicans nationally. The next, Democratic enthusiasm metrics spike in key metropolitan areas. Generic ballot numbers tighten and expand within days. Media narratives chase these swings, often overstating trends that dissolve by the next news cycle. Inside campaign headquarters, a different conversation unfolds. Data scientists and field organizers admit privately that voter behavior feels less anchored to party identity than in previous cycles. Issue prioritization shifts rapidly. A national headline can temporarily reshape local races. Economic indicators influence sentiment, but not always predictably. Inflation concerns, job growth data, and housing affordability all weigh on voters, yet they do so unevenly. In industrial regions of Pennsylvania and Michigan, economic messaging resonates differently than in tech-driven suburbs or agricultural communities. Even incumbency, once a formidable advantage, shows signs of fragility. Long-serving lawmakers find themselves defending not just policy positions, but their relevance. Voters express frustration with gridlock in Washington. Approval ratings for Congress remain stubbornly low. The argument that experience matters competes with the appeal of disruption, and then come the Senate primaries. In a closely watched race in Wisconsin, a candidate once considered a long shot surges late, fueled by grassroots energy and a viral debate performance. In another state, a well-funded contender underperforms expectations, raising questions about whether money alone can secure nominations in an environment driven by intensity. Each result chips away at the idea that 2026 will follow a predictable script. Political donors grow cautious. Some redirect funds toward late-cycle advertising rather than early investments. Others double down, interpreting volatility as opportunity. Voters, meanwhile, appear less loyal to party labels and more responsive to perceived authenticity. Candidates who communicate directly, whether through town halls, social platforms, or long-form interviews, sometimes outperform those relying heavily on traditional advertising. The electorate feels less scripted, less mechanical, more emotional. And that emotional undercurrent makes forecasting dangerous. The phrase realignment begins to surface in commentary, cautiously at first. Analysts debate whether shifting coalitions are temporary reactions to current leadership or indicators of deeper structural change? Are suburban voters permanently drifting? Are working-class alignments solidifying? Are younger voters forming lasting partisan identities or experimenting? No consensus emerges. Instead, the early primary results expose a simple truth. The American electorate is not frozen in place. It is fluid, and fluid electorates produce unexpected outcomes. As the calendar moves closer to the general election season, party leaders on both sides confront an uncomfortable realization. The internal battles they fought in the primaries have consequences. Some nominees now face uphill climbs in competitive districts. Others, once underestimated, enter the general election with surprising momentum. The fall of political certainty does not mean chaos, but it does mean risk. In 2026, every district feels slightly more competitive than it did on paper. Every poll feels slightly less reliable. Every strategic decision carries amplified consequences. Because when certainty fades, power becomes more contestable. And as November approaches, the question shifts from who will win to how much the political landscape itself is changing beneath America's feet. By late summer of 2026, the internal battles are largely settled. Nominees are chosen. Party unity is publicly restored. Campaign messaging sharpens into clearer contrasts, and now the focus shifts from identity to power. Control of the United States House of Representatives hangs on a margin so narrow that a handful of districts, sometimes fewer than a dozen, could determine the legislative direction of the country. In recent cycles, major bills have passed or failed by only a few votes. Committee chairs have changed hands by the slimmest of edges. Oversight authority, subpoena power, budget negotiations, all pivot on arithmetic. In 2026, that arithmetic feels fragile. A swing of 5 seats could transform the agenda in Washington. A swing of 10 could redraw it entirely. In competitive districts across Pennsylvania, California, New York, and Arizona, campaigns intensify. Advertising saturates local airwaves. National party committees flood targeted markets with last-minute investments. Outside groups deploy data-driven persuasion efforts, micro-targeting persuadable voters down to individual neighborhoods. Because the House is not just symbolic, it controls the federal purse strings. It initiates revenue legislation. It launches investigations. It sets the tone of confrontation or cooperation with the executive branch. If Republicans gain control, the focus may shift toward regulatory rollback efforts, aggressive oversight hearings, and attempts to constrain executive authority. If Democrats maintain or expand control, priorities could center on safeguarding existing legislation, pushing incremental policy expansions, and resisting conservative initiatives emerging from the Senate or state governments. But the Senate carries its own gravity. Unlike the House, Senate races are statewide. Larger electorates, broader coalitions, higher visibility. In 2026, several competitive Senate seats in states like Nevada, Ohio, and Georgia demand enormous resources. The Senate confirms federal judges. It ratifies treaties. It approves cabinet appointments. It can stall or accelerate a president's agenda. A 1-seat shift can alter committee control. A 2-seat shift can redefine legislative viability. And in an era of polarized politics, divided government often produces stalemate. But it can also produce negotiation, carefully brokered compromises born of necessity. The 2026 midterms therefore represent more than a referendum on current leadership. They are a structural decision about how Washington functions for the next 2 years. Will the federal government operate under unified party control, or will Americans see divided government, where bipartisan agreements are difficult, but sometimes unavoidable? The stakes extend beyond legislation. Markets react to political stability. International allies monitor congressional signals on defense spending and foreign policy commitments. Federal agencies anticipate shifts in oversight intensity. Every seat carries ripple effects. Voters sense this weight. In town halls, questions grow sharper. Constituents ask candidates not just what they believe, but what they can realistically accomplish in a divided capital. Candidates are pressed on how they would handle budget showdowns, potential government shutdowns, and debt ceiling negotiations. The memory of past fiscal brinkmanship lingers. And then there is the broader institutional question: public trust in. Congress remains low. Approval ratings hover in historically modest territory. Many voters express frustration not only with policy outcomes, but with process itself. They see dysfunction. They see gridlock. They see partisanship overshadowing pragmatism. In that environment, the 2026 midterms become something more existential. They are a test of whether incremental governance can survive in a polarized age, or whether confrontation is the new normal. For Republicans, a strong showing could solidify the ideological direction tested in the primaries, reinforcing the argument that voters reward clarity and contrast. For Democrats, holding ground or expanding majorities could validate coalition-building strategies and defensive messaging around institutional stability. But there are also risks. If nominees who emerged from intense primary struggle in competitive districts, party leaders may question whether internal ideological battles weakened general election prospects. If turnout fails to match expectations, narratives of enthusiasm could collapse overnight, and beyond the numbers, there is symbolism. Midterms historically function as signals. In 1994, they marked a conservative resurgence. In 2006, a backlash against wartime policy. In 2010, the rise of grassroots fiscal activism. In 2018, a wave of suburban realignment. What signal will 2026 send? Will it affirm current trajectories or interrupt them? The answer may not come in a single landslide. It may arrive quietly, through a handful of flipped districts, a narrow Senate shift, or a status quo so tight that every vote in Congress feels precarious. But the implications will be real. Committee gavels will change hands. Legislative calendars will adjust. Policy priorities will rise or stall, and perhaps most importantly, the tone of American governance heading toward the next presidential cycle will be set. Because midterms are not endpoints. They are inflection points. As election night approaches, analysts prepare their maps. Campaigns brace for long hours. Ballots are cast in urban precincts and rural counties, in suburbs and small towns, across a country still debating its direction. When the results begin to populate screens, they will not merely determine winners and losers. They will define the operating system of Washington, and in a political climate this fluid, even a small shift can alter the national trajectory. The question now is not just who controls Congress. It is what kind of country that Congress will attempt to shape. As the dust settles on the 2026 midterm elections, one truth becomes unavoidable. America's political landscape has shifted, but exactly how and for how long remains uncertain. The results do not arrive as a single story. They arrive as a mosaic of victories, narrow defeats, and unexpected upsets. Some districts change hands, others cling to the familiar. For voters and politicians alike, the narrative is not simply about which party holds the keys to Washington. It is about what those keys will unlock. In districts where insurgent candidates prevailed in the primaries, their victories send ripples far beyond local borders. They signal that internal party debates are no longer contained. Ideology, strategy, and messaging are now national conversations. In areas where moderates hold sway, the message is equally powerful. Coalition building, persuasion, and pragmatism still matter. America has become a country where no approach is guaranteed, where voter choice can surprise even the most experienced political operatives. The Senate and the House, finally convening after the results, will reflect these tensions. Committees will be battlegrounds for influence. Legislative priorities will compete with ideological statements. Bipartisan cooperation may be tested, strained, or, in some cases, forced by necessity. The structures of governance, long assumed, stable, are now operating in a more dynamic, sometimes fragile equilibrium. But beyond the halls of Congress, the midterms reveal something deeper. The electorate itself is evolving. Generational change, shifting demographics, and fluid partisan alignment suggest that the political map of 2026 may look very different from the map of 2030. Younger voters, previously viewed as unpredictable, have demonstrated both the power of engagement and the volatility of shifting loyalties. Suburban voters continue to redefine political expectations. Rural districts, too, are no longer monolithic. And independents, long considered the swing factor, have proven capable of influencing outcomes in decisive ways. The implications are profound. Political parties must now ask themselves who they represent, what they stand for, and how they plan to navigate an electorate that resists simple categorization. Leaders who fail to reconcile internal divisions risk diminishing relevance. Those who successfully balance principle and pragmatism may redefine their party for the next decade. For the country as a whole, the question lingers: is 2026 a temporary disruption, a cycle of volatility to be corrected in future elections? Or is it the opening of a more enduring realignment, where traditional assumptions about voter behavior, party loyalty, and ideological dominance no longer hold? History offers cautionary examples. Midterm elections have always been inflection points, moments when the public reassesses leadership and direction. But rarely has the interplay of internal party struggle, voter fluidity, and societal polarization been this pronounced. The 2026 midterms are a reminder that democracy is not static. It is a process shaped by choices, debates, and the constant redefinition of political identity. As Americans reflect on the results, campaigns already turn their gaze toward the next presidential cycle. Lessons learned, coalitions formed, and fractures exposed will guide strategy, messaging, and leadership contests. The reverberations of 2026 will influence not just policy, but the very character of political engagement for years to come. In the end, the midterms are not merely a contest of numbers or party labels. They are a mirror, reflecting both the strengths and vulnerabilities of American democracy. They ask a simple yet profound question. In a country defined by debate, division, and participation, what will it take to govern, to lead, and to shape the future? The answer is still unfolding, and that uncertainty, the tension between possibility and outcome, may be the most enduring legacy of the 2026 midterms. The story is not over. It has only begun.